Ada. I'm a graphic design senior. I'm a graphic design senior at School of Design. And yeah, just before we begin, I want to remind everyone that this is recorded. So about SOD. So it features a range of speakers from game design, UX, UI, graphic design, industrial design, HCI, ethics, social justice, emerging technologies, and much, much more. We've had Ruben Pater, Rajesh Shah, Leslie Ann Noel, Antoinette Carroll, Scott Storrett as speakers before. And yeah, just the best way to keep track is to follow us on Eventbrite, Instagram, and Facebook. Yeah, and most of our events are on YouTube as well. So now I would like to officially introduce Wael. Wael Morcos is a graphic designer and type designer from Beirut, Lebanon. And upon receiving his BA in graphic design from Notre Dame University in Lebanon, he spent 3 years developing identities in Arabic and Latin typefaces, in addition to working in print and exhibition design. And he received his MFA from RISD in 2013. And then he moved to New York and worked at several studios before founding his own studio, MorcosKey. Wael has been featured in print magazines 15 Under 30, was named a Young Gun by the Art Directors Club, and an Ascender by the Type Directors Club. Tonight, Wael will be discussing designing for multicultural contexts across a variety of scripts, the challenges this can present, and how considerations of history, cultural nuances, and diverse communities come into play. There will be plenty of time for questions after the talk. So in the meantime, please join me in welcoming Wael.
Thank you, Huda. Thank you, Janet, for having me. Thank you, everybody, for coming and inviting me. I'm excited to be here with you tonight. We're gonna keep this casual and chill. There's the questions at the end. So anything that comes to your mind about the projects, about things related to your projects, feel free to ask. I'm an open book and I like questions. My name is Wael Morcos. I am the Morcos in MorcosKey, which is a graphic design studio based in Brooklyn. The other half of MorcosKey is John, my partner. I am originally from Beirut, Lebanon. That's where I grew up. That's where I did my undergrad in graphic design. And then I worked for Brand Central, a branding department within Saatchi in Beirut, focused a lot on identities. And after that, I went to RISD in Providence. John is from Alabama. We met in Providence. We both went to RISD, in the graphic design department. After that, we both moved to New York City. We started like a parallel career. We both got full-time jobs at different places. John worked for Great Advertising a couple of years and did an internship at Spotco. And after that, started freelancing on his own. And I did the same. I got a full-time job at CNG Partners. Then I worked at a studio called Base Design. I interned for studios like MTWTF, Red Antler, Hush Studios, and then I started working with other companies like IBM. I did 9 months at Apple. So that was a really exciting time to be exposed to different type of designs. We got the chance to be in different meeting rooms and seeing amazing, inspiring people that run companies approach design in different ways, sometimes in similar ways that allowed us to formulate our own ideas about what we want to do. I think eventually we wanted to create a space that allows us to evolve as designers and do things that we like. So we started our studio. It's called MorcosKey with our names. This is our glamour shot at our studio. We actually don't move to a different studio, so we have to get another one. The main reason that we started our own studio is we wanted to have a say on the type of project that we work on and the people we collaborate with and do projects that excite us personally. And to me, I've worked in a lot of corporate spaces, and it's exciting when the design director gets you a printed brief about what you need to design and think about. But I always had the question, what happened before that brief got typed and got to me? And I was always curious, how do these conversations go? Sometimes I was wondering if that was the right brief or the right approach to the project. So the studio was a space to kind of offer me that opportunity, but also to find space to do what we're really excited about. John is also a graphic designer, an art director, a writer, and a painter. So the studio, running our own practice, allows John to also explore his cultural identity and his interests. So I will not go too much in detail in the work that he does, but it's a really interesting approach to painting, and obviously his design influences come into play in the limited palette that he uses, and his interest in his southernness, queerness, and the concept of chosen families are themes that come across a lot of his painting. We have been running the studio for 5 years now. Actually, in February 22nd, 2022, that was 5 years since our launch party. So we created this 1-minute video as a celebration of that I will share with you now. So that was a quick snapshot of things that we've done in the past. I'm going to talk about some of these projects and maybe go a little bit in detail and tell some of the stories of how this came to be. One of the projects that we are really excited about and was really important for our studio is really this collaboration with a magazine called The 10th Magazine, which was founded by these gentlemen on the photo here, Carrie Sept, Kyle Banks, and Andrea Vernon. And what they wanted to do is create a space to share the narratives and musing of Black queer people and other creatives of color. Actually, John found this the first issue of the magazine by mistake, and I was really excited about seeing something that looks like him and seeing himself represented in an art and culture magazine. So he reached out to them, and what started as an informal conversation became a full-fledged collaboration. So we started helping them creating the magazine, and for 5 volumes after that, we literally designed it from start to finish. Admitting people.
Yeah, sorry.
No. What's exciting about the 10th magazine, it's not like any other magazine. So it doesn't follow like a established design system of a fixed masthead and openers and a grid that also always the same. It's more a free form collaboration with the editor. So we sit with Kari and we discuss what the magazine is, and we create mood boards about what that looks like and what his vision means in terms of colors, photography, typography. This issue was about technology and the intersection of Black queer people in the tech industry. How are they presented? What's their role in it? So the layouts borrowed a lot from the vernacular of digital screens. So some of the articles were typeset in Windows, and the cover was also a play on that as well. Another issue of volume 5 was about the Black queer romantic of past peers and vast lands. So here again, our collaboration was a little bit deeper at this point. So we were involved in the art direction. We were present on some of the shoots, suggestions way to approach the magazine. The design itself was a little bit more lyrical and followed classical typography in the selection of the grids, the font, and how things are laid out in a little bit more of a drama and flair for the opening of the article themselves. So graphic motifs and selection of typefaces all played a role to kind of communicate these stories and complement the photography and the art direction and the fashion that was presented in those. So We do different type of things at the studio, and that is an example of some editorial work that we've done for magazines. But as you'll see, a lot of the work we do tends to pivot, or we're attracted by arts and cultural institution or projects that have a social dimension to them. The next project is actually a branding project for the Webbies, the award organization. So they reached out to us and they wanted to create a new award that didn't have a name back then. It had the placeholder name, the Purpose Award. What they wanted to do is recognize the breadth of purpose and mission-driven work, online and offline, around the globe, and honor companies that and brands and people that strive or try to create long-lasting impact. As a studio that works in branding, we tackle it in a lot of different ways, but our methodology usually has three kind of phases to it. The first one is strategy, and we kind of devise our own way of doing this, but it usually means sort of collaboration and conversation with the client. When they come to us, we try to establish what the project is about, who else is doing similar work, what are we trying to do. Sometimes this could be a conversation over a Google Doc. Sometimes it could be a couple of workshops over Zoom or in person. Sometimes these strategy phases are important to kind of align the different parties in the client team and make them all feel heard and participate in the process. As a studio or as a designer, sometimes our role is to kind of herd the people involved and create a sense of where we're going with that so that everything goes smoothly. Particularly for that project, there was a big component that was the name of that organization. And one of the things that we did is try to create these participatory exercises to see where the decision makers of the client, where their heads were, what were they thinking of. Eventually, we crafted the name for the new award, a communication strategy, and the visual identity. And what we settled on was an interesting name. It's called the Anthem Award. And one of the missions that we kind of clarified and the verbal language that we help write for them is the fact that they are focused on amplifying voices and sparking global change. So this is how, for example, a name can, where the name can actually reflect what they are about. And we were inspired by the idea of a megaphone of amplifying voices to create like a simple logo that can reflect that idea. And that can work at different scales that become like this little A for anthem, for awards, but also this speaker that can amplify voices and shed light onto what's happening. And the triangle eventually became a motif in this kind of visual identity and the graphic language that we use across. And obviously a lot of that presence is digital first. So we try to expand on that to create a language that they can play around with, reinvent every time, create communication and content out of nothing. But even when they actually do have content, they can deploy the identity on, let's say, entry kits or lanyards or something as fancy as a tote bag from brand. Obviously, this also translates into the stationery and how the system works. But to me, the most exciting part of the identity is when it's populated with real content. And for that brand, it's when the people come in play, the people that they are highlighting, the driver of these social changes that they are honoring. So there was a lot of the social media templates for stories and also for the way to deploy the identity on their feed. So these are images from their inaugural competition or results that happened earlier this year. And it's really warms my heart to see that the actual triangular frame that we created served that purpose and was used in different ways to kind of help them achieve what they wanted to do. So that's, for example, is a typical branding exercise that we go through. And I will talk about another branded one down the road when I talk about a different museum. Another project I wanted to share is Black Futures, which is a book that was a long time in the making that we're really excited. It came out last year. It's by Kimberly True and Jenna Wortham. It's a thick book that really surveys artwork, essays, poetry, and contributions from Black creatives from the height of the AIDS epidemic until the speculative future. when we met with Jenna and Kimberly, they actually have a very strong online presence, and they communicate through Twitter and Instagram, and that's how they actually met. So we wanted to create a book that kind of highlights this idea of connection that are made online. So the book is divided into these entries. Every spread or two can become a different entry, whether it's poetry or an interview or an essay. So big condensed typography signals that you are now at a new entry or an opening spread, if you will. And then color coding, green was for interview, yellow was for essays that are collected online, and other regular essays just had the white paper color. And what's interesting is that we wanted to highlight the idea of browsing online. So at any point you could open the book and have a content that's speaking to you. It's not necessarily absolutely linear, even though it did have indices spread out throughout the book and not connected at the end. So the indices became also like a table of content and a way of navigating the book. And the footers were also activated as a way to connect you to a different story. So when you're reading one, it kind of like gives you related links. It's almost like when you're shopping on Amazon and people also were interested in this type of article. So it's kind of like creating this hyperlinks in a physical book for connected themes. And on the right side of the page on the footer, we also had the last names of every creator or artist or writer that become like a phone book reference, if you will. And we just go throughout the book, you kind of see all these people. And it's kind of also a way to give their names and more presence in the book. Whether it's identities or books or editorial work, typography is always at the center of what we do. I personally consider typography to be one of the most exciting and important and powerful tool in a designer's toolbox. It allows you to express a message in different ways and to permeate the way it's said. So these are different type of posters that we created for different events. And these were actually the earliest collaboration between John and myself back at RISD, whether it was theater posters or posters for talks that we've done, or just things that we created for cultural events that we were invited to participate in. I'm particularly interested in Arabic as a language, as a script, and alongside Khazak Apelian and Christian Sarkis, we created this Arabic lettering workshop series. And every one of them is themed around a different way of interpreting the expressive quality of Arabic as a script. The one on the right, for example, deals with low resolution digital screens. The one on the right here again deals with stencil typography that was done. The one on the left was about geometric kufi. This was focused on the word Yalla Habibi that was done in Minneapolis last November. And these workshops allow really me to travel around and connect with new people every time. And a lot of the inspiration of the Arabic can bring influences back my work, whether we're developing books or identity. This is, for example, creating logos to tell the stories of our clients and help them reach new audiences. This is a logo for a Brooklyn-based bakery by Syrian refugees. This is another logo for a Kaftan house in Saudi Arabia. So they create these really elaborate gowns, and the logo is a little bit of an abstraction of Arabic calligraphy that's meant to be at the same time design and simple, yet create a little sense of ornamentation in the way it is designed. So at the studio, I play different roles. Sometimes I'm a creative director, sometimes I'm a business developer, sometimes I'm following up with invoices, sometimes I'm a graphic designer, and sometimes I'm actually a type designer, and I create actual functional fonts. And type design is slightly a different type of discipline. It allows me to go in and zoom in on details of drawing letters and forms and focus on the black and white relationship between all these characters. And it's really a long, tedious, meditative job when creating all these fonts. And but the result is actually quite exciting, especially when it comes to Arabic typography. Arabic has one of the most exciting history in terms of calligraphy and expressive way of rendering the Arabic, but as a typographic form, Arabic has always been an afterthought in technology that most of the time has always been created with a detached Latin script in mind. From the printing presses to typewriters to keyboards, they always favor simplicity and modular way of typesetting words. Which is why it's exciting every time we create something new, because it allows us to participate in enriching the contemporary Arabic font library that's available. But in most of the cases, the history of Arabic calligraphy has always been my source of inspiration in drawing font and finding solutions that worked hundreds of years ago and trying to reinterpret them to work for today. This is a type of kufi, one of the oldest ones, and it kind of used this really horizontal elongation in some of the letters to create justification across the lines. And this is one of my earliest fonts, a revival of that type of calligraphy. It's called Kufam. It was designed simultaneously in English and Arabic. Artur Schmal, a type designer from Holland, designed the Latin. It was part of a cultural project called typographic matchmaking, where both fonts are designed from scratch and one designer is in conversation with the other. So one source of reference inspired the other. So that was about like 10 years ago. But that was acquired by Google 2 years ago. And so it's fun to see it part of the Google font library so people can actually access it, because typefaces are actually tools. So I'm not only I'm designing something that other people can use to typeset different words with and create something that I did not imagine with that tool. Another type of work that I do is adapting Western libraries to Arabic. So I get asked a lot by foundries to interpret some of their bestseller fonts into the Arabic script as they expand their libraries. I've worked with Commercial Type, a type foundry based in New York, to create the Arabic counterpart of Graphic, alongside Khazak Apelian, again, a collaborator of mine when it comes to Arabic typography. And these are all opportunities for us to try to look at these manuscripts and create something that works for the modern era, something that can operate across several ways, something that can convey complex information and typography, something that can serve a bilingual communication need that exists for Arabic, one of the fourth used script, the fourth most spoken language in the world. This is, for example, another adaptation of Brando Arabic font by a type foundry called Bold Monday, based in Holland. So Brando exists as a serif and a sans serif, and the decision here was to create an Arabic that can work with both. And that was under the direction of Mike Adam, who's a type designer and a creative director by the another project that I'll show in a second. More Arabic adaptation, we recently released Lyon Arabic. This was an interesting project because we tried to ask ourselves, what does an italic in Arabic mean? And how do you translate that concept? So we went back to manuscripts to see how scribes used to deal with typographic hierarchy on the same page. Sorry. Something that we realized is that the different type of scripts that exist in Arabic were used to convey these different type of information on the page. So you see, for example, on this manuscript, the top one uses a type of script that we call nasakh, and the bottom one is a type that we call kufi, and they're used in different ways. The bottom one is more ornate for display purposes. The top one is for more body text. So we kind of followed that thinking to create a whole entirely different variation of Lyon, one that is upright that you see here on the right side, and one that is slanted that you see on the left, that borrows influences from the Nas Ta'liq, which is a type of Arabic that comes naturally as slanted. So instead of just slanting and pushing the design, it kind of echoes what a true italic in Latin typography might mean. So it's a little bit of a cursive adaptation of that. So that's a typeface that's meant for text, for long body text, and is meant to operate across several ways as well, and to become something that people can use. Back to the story of IBM, a lot of big companies today pay to use their fonts and to get the licenses because fonts are softwares. But as they grow and become multinational companies and they need fonts across different languages and scripts, the bill that they have to pay to license all these typefaces across all these machines all over the world becomes so expensive annually that it makes more sense for these companies to pay type designer to develop proprietary typefaces. For example, IBM in this case put together a team of type designers led by Mike Ebbing on the top left. I am on the top center, Khashak, my design partner, on the bottom right. And each of these designers that you see on the screen is expert in their own script, including Thai, Cyrillic, and Hebrew, and all with the goal of creating a font family that would become one voice for IBM. So what Mike Ebbing did is look back at the Paul Rand logo and get inspired to create a typeface that kind of echoes some of the characteristics. For example, the geometric slab serif on the I, the idea of the B that has a curved shape on the outside and angular counter on the inside, the pointiness of the M, all come together to create something of a typeface that is a grotesque typeface that could call their own. That captures the ethos of the company, which is to connect man with the machine. So at the same time, it's a typeface that's engineered, but also human. So you feel that there are soft parts in the way the things get thin when they connect, but also has a mechanical part of it. So for example, you look at the round shapes of the A on the inside, it's pretty flat, whereas the E is fully kind of curvy on the outside. So my approach to creating Arabic counterparts for existing fonts is avoid cutting existing Latin letters and connect them back together and create what could be described as Frankenstein Arabic. What I do is break down the brief that led to the design of the Latin looking in a particular way. And I try to answer the brief in a way that makes sense for Arabic. So the following 10 slides are a little bit too much of the details of typography, so I'll skip those or go through them really quickly. It includes looking at the thick and thin contrast in Arabic. What you see on the right is classical Arabic typography or calligraphy. The information on the X side, the diacritic dots, the shape of the counters, the rhythm of the stems, and we look for details that happen naturally in Arabic where design innovation can happen to kind of create a font that makes sense. Particularly for this typeface, the idea of flat on the inside was also reflected in the Arabic, but horizontally where the letters connect on the baseline. So all the letters are drawn in a way to have a flat inside and a curved outside. They thin when they connect in the same way. And like I said, type design can be a long, tedious process. So 9 months later, a typeface is born in several weights that can operate in very complex situation and create layouts that can also communicate the complexity of the information itself. So IBM supported 68 languages and had over 1,000 glyphs and over 100 ligatures that allow complex typesetting, including some religious symbols that we also brought in and included in the typeface itself. What's fun about this is IBM released it as an open source on GitHub. So all the language are also there. So, and for free, even for commercial use. So anybody can find it, download it, and use it in their project in any language. The fun part about being a type designer and a graphic designer is that I can get to test these typefaces that I'm working on in projects and kind of put back the graphic designer hat and ask myself, what kind of problems am I facing? What kind of typeface would be really good if I could use in the project? For example, this is a book design where we tested Lyon Arabic before it was released. This is the inaugural Charter Architectural Triennial books that happened in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. But designing bilingual books for Arabic is quite a challenging task itself, because Arabic as a language goes from right to left, as opposed to Latin that goes from left to right. So organizing a book in two languages can be also a complicated task. And our role is here to simplify information for the end user and to kind of split things in a way that makes sense, especially when some of the articles are originally written in Arabic and then translated in the translation section. One of the solutions that makes sense in some of the cases is design a book that goes in both directions. So the back cover is the cover of the Arabic and vice versa, because Arabic goes from right to left. Another solution, which was in this case, when the publisher agrees or tells you that that was makes sense, is creating two entire separate publications, one in English and one in Arabic. So in this case, the challenge was to kind of create a layout and then create it entirely the same, mirrored from right to left for the Arabic. So this is what the book in Latin might look like, and the book in the Arabic on the right might look like, including the separation pages. What's interesting is that even when designing a book that's entirely in Arabic, we live in such a bilingual, globalized world already. How do you put footnotes or hyperlinks that can only be exist in English within a text? So we're using here Lyon, the slanted version, as a call out paragraph that's indented, and then mixing it with the other Lyon that's upright. And then in the footnotes on the left, we're bringing back English typography. So these create a lot of complex settings that as a type designer and a graphic designer, you put all your skills together to be able to solve and create something that still makes sense and to the reader. Not everything is always that complicated. Sometimes it's actually fun to just create opportunities where I can use my fonts on a little bit more expressive outlets, like this blanket that has these floral wildflower names on it, like iris and jasmine and poppies. I really enjoy these type of exercises that allow me to put typography on silent objects, and typography has that ability to really give object voice, or as if the object is telling you a story in itself as well. Sometimes we work with international companies to help them develop their campaigns. For example, this is a lettering piece that reads the Saudi national football team. And that was created for Nike when they were doing these campaigns for the different countries that were participating in the FIFA World Cup a couple of years ago. So our role here was experts on the Arabic language and typographers to provide them with graphic solutions, and more specifically typographic solutions in terms of layouts and fonts that they can use and deploy across the identity. So it's really fun, again, to be able to collaborate with different people in different ways. Sometimes the collaboration is pretty straightforward. Sometimes we get asked to adapt just a mark to Arabic. So this is a different type of branding exercise, but we're not going through the whole three-phase process of a strategy and dividing a whole system of how the identity is deployed. For example, this is Commercial Type, the Type Foundry in New York, and that's a high contrast Arabic stencil version to kind of become their logo. Bloomberg as well, when expanding in the Middle East, we created a couple of signature for them that they can use using a customized version of graphic, the typeface that I showed you earlier. This is a logo for Penhaligons, an all caps, high contrast serif for a luxury perfume house in London, and using, again, Arabic elongation between the letters that happen naturally to convey something that also looks a little bit monumental and can be used in titles. For Burberry, also the adaptation recreated a more softer type of logo that goes away from ornamentation and creates something that's a little bit more pared down. And more recently, the Arabic adaptation for Jo Malone in London. It's interesting because all these projects come specifically to serve a lot of the countries in the Gulf part of the world. We're talking Kuwait, we're talking Dubai and the Emirates, we're talking Qatar and Saudi Arabia. These are countries that realize the limited lifespan of hydrocarbon-based economies, and these newly formed states are actively investing in alternative modes of economic development. So they are investing in the arts and culture sector and creating need for design practices focused on cultural institutions and usually funded by governments. So it's a lot of exciting opportunities for innovation and creation that happens. Their goal is to become among the region's leading powers by design because they decided so and they have the economic capability of doing so. And graphic design in this case is a necessary tool to visualize and communicate this new positioning for them. So designers and architects and starchitects are tasked with all sorts of jobs, from creating advertising campaigns to designing exhibitions, signage system, multilingual publications, and also most notably is creating visual identities for new institution and new museum and new cultural centers. So part of what the logo adaptation that you saw is actually because there are in some states that I mentioned laws that would require these brands to have a physical sign in Arabic in the mall or in the window of the shop to by law to be able to operate. So it kind of creates an opportunity to create these logos also in Arabic. So these are some of the videos that I took in my couple of travels in these countries, which led to kind of developing strategies for these companies where a lot of time past, present, and future is a recurrent trope that is at play in the strategy of these brands. They are so young in their advancement, but they are so rich in their cultural past and history. And it's always kind of this tension of represented where they are, where they have been, and where they're going in one brand. And Arabic typography is that playing field where all these tensions happen, representing their language in the most exciting possible way. Which brings me to this project, Dadu, the identity for the Children's Museum of Qatar. So this is not the identity, this is just typesetting the name in default fonts to explain a couple of things. So we worked closely with a design agency in New York City called 2x4, and they bring us in as cultural experts in the design process to help them weigh in on the strategy development for the project, the naming, as well as the developing of the visual identity itself. There was a long process, but we settled eventually on the name Dadu, which means the marks left in the sand when children are playing. So if you imagine a swing and your feet are leaving a mark in the sand, they call it in Arabic alamat al-dadu, or the marks of play. And that kind of aligned perfectly with the museum's strategy, that this is not just a museum, this is an educational institution, because children learn by playing. What's interesting is that the way the word is written in Arabic, I mean, the fonts are not loading, that's why things are a bit offset here. But in Latin, you have the D and the vowel A, and then the D and the vowel U. In Arabic, these vocalization marks are short vowels, so they're like placed on top of the letters. So you have the same first right angle letter looking with a oblique on top of it that reads da. And then the other one is the same, but has this kind of like loopy letter on top of it that reads do. So it's Dadu. That's the name of the museum that was approved, and we moved ahead for the design. So, like I said, the history of the script and how it's written is always the source of inspiration, because reading is really something that we do by convention, and we read another typography quote, you read best what you read most. So you always want to build on what people are used to seeing and reading and explore it in a creative way. These are different ways that same letter happens and occurs in different type of styles. Some are much more geometric and like you see on the top right. Some are geometric but have a lot of floral to them. And some are very organic, like the second one from the left on top. But basically that's what this letter looks like. And part of the concept we were looking at in the strategy is the idea of these building blocks of creativity and ways that this museum can be a source of education and play, and develop the idea of marks of play and marked by play. There was a long exploratory phase, and we developed different design directions, but eventually the one that we liked the most is one that kind of captured a lot of the elements that we wanted. And that is creating a graphic language for the museum that can encapsulate this idea of building blocks for play, and one that kind of foregrounded the Arabic language in the shape of the logo itself. So the big red shape that you see here are the dal, the D letter that I explained. The vocalization mark of the Arabic are nested inside of them. And the Latin is as well split in each of the letters. So actually the top reads da in both languages, the bottom reads do in both languages as well. And that would not have worked if we placed them next to each other, because Arabic reads opposite as Latin. So stacking them like building blocks was the key to kind of provide one singular linear way of reading for these two languages, and kind of achieve a client concern, which is highlighting the Arabic language in the look and feel of that museum. Like any identity, to me, is built like an onion. So it's a layer of ingredients that come together and are built to kind of create the look and feel of that and the visual expression of that identity. Typography is one of the most important players. After the logo and the core idea of the brand, which are the center of that onion, comes typography as a layer. So we customized Favorit Arabic, which I also had designed for Dynamo, a type foundry in Europe. And we combined it with another Latin typeface called Tenon that has these round dots, and created one cohesive typographic family that we renamed Dadu for the museum. And then from the logo itself, we derived these kind of shapes that can be combined together to create patterns, and they in themselves become like a language for the identity for the museum. And we integrated these shapes into the font itself. And like I mentioned, fonts can be tools. So when we actually communicate or deliver these assets to the client, it allows their team to deploy the identity like we had imagined it. And that's the thing about creating visual identities, because you are rarely creating the final product that is being published. We are creating a set of assets and a way to combine them and use them together for a whole different team to do that work. So this is a way of already giving them access to a base set of these shapes that they can use in themselves in their communication. Another layer is obviously color, and for that museum in itself, we kind of built on Joseph Albert's color theory and the juxtaposition of unexpected colors next to each other, and the idea that they can always kind of be combined together to create something joyful, energetic, and unexpected. So when you mix all these ingredients together, the shape of the logo, the graphic shape that you create from it, the typography and the colors, the identity system itself almost builds itself out. You just have to create a rationale for how things come together. So the stationery can also be playful and expressive every time you see it. The hoarding for around the museum can also be an opportunity to add imagery inside these shapes, and as well give them a system to create posters for events and exhibitions that are housed at the museum, including some direct application on notebooks and sketchbooks. Like any visual identity, it's always accompanied by a visual identity guideline, and that's a document that a lot of designers prepare that kind of breaks down the thinking behind everything we're doing, and it clarifies it for someone else who has not designed that identity to be able to deploy it, to put it into action, and to make the best use of it. Oh. I don't know where that came from. This video doesn't have any sound. It might have been someone else on the call.
Yeah.
Okay. This is probably someone else. It's someone else on the call.
Someone's not muted.
They should be on muted.
Oh my God, was I not muted?
Oh my god. Wasn't the best.
Anyway,
I'll watch for it.
okay. Another branding project that we can talk about. Sometimes you don't start a brand creation from scratch. Sometimes a client comes to you with an existing identity and your role is to help them prepare that identity for the next years to come. This was the case for Mizna, a client based here in Minneapolis, an art and culture institution that documents Arab American stories through prose, poetry, and art. And they grew organically, and they had a journal that publishes poetry. They had a film festival, they created events, they had a podcast. And as you can see, eventually there was no coherent way of them communicating what they do. So they came to us with the idea of kind of like whipping things back into order and create visual cohesiveness between what they do. So if you look at their logo on top, even though English and Arabic kind of look slightly different. So what we did is build on what they had and the geometry and symmetry that is inherent in the Arabic logo itself to create a logo that's much more modern, clear, bold, and still retain some sort of visual impact on the page. And when it came to deploying that identity, we wanted to give them a flexible system that they can use. So we use the way the Arabic typography or calligraphy connects and elongates at the baseline to create a system that can become a masthead. So a quick way for them to create layouts in the future and to keep them cohesive is to just elongate the logo as much as they needed on their applications and create a system that can be a little bit playful, new every time, fresh, but also usable and has potential to develop on different things. And most importantly, it can act as a masthead on the poetry journal that they have. So that was one of their first issues that deployed the identity. And you can see the logo itself stretching on the spine. And then we created a different lockup that used that same elongation system to frame the typography for the film festival and borrows from the idea of a traditional movie projection to allow to create a dynamic logo that can move. And for creating their awards, we got inspired from the olive trees that are also common around places in the Middle East to create the winning award laurels. And they created a couple of templates that they can use to kind of allow their typography to sit. So it's like a little mini typographic composition that is thought of as a template. So they can actually go in and alter the typography and create more variations on it. And more recently, we collaborated with Mizna to create a newsprint that is curated by Maryam Basid with illustration by Haytham Haddad from Palestine. And it is called I Want Sky. And this is a poetry newsletter that celebrates and honors the life of Sarah Higazi, an LGBTQ activist that was exiled from Egypt and eventually sadly committed suicide in Canada. So this magazine or this newsprint is meant to be a celebration of Swana, LGBTQ community and its diaspora. When they came to us, they wanted to create like a little poetry booklet that can sit on the shelf. But we were excited about creating something that's grander, that can create visibility, something they can open and take space visually when somebody reads it. So we went back to the newsprint format. And it also solved another problem for us, which is the type of content and poetry that they curated into this publication is very different and diverse and exists in different ways. And if you know writers, especially poetry writers, they're very specific about how things are typeset, how many spaces there are, how many indents there are between lines, and how something is read. So giving us a vast playing field allowed us to create different layouts every time that would allow you to kind of readjust your reading perspective when you hold that newsletter to newsprint to read different things. And the illustrations of Haytham were a perfect way to kind of riff on the theme of I Want Sky, the desire of freedom and liberty, to include moments of poetic resonance within these poems and create Arabic lettering pieces that kind of punctuate what the user is getting from that lyrical typographic piece, if you will. We even went back and found a little poem by Sarah herself on her now defunct blog. So we kind of broke it down into several lines and put it as a kind of like a message on the tip of each page. And it can be read as we're flipping the pages. And then again, for the bio page, we kind of overlap different portraits of abstract faces as a way, again, to blur the notion of identity and gender performance. So that's an overview of what the newsprint looks like. And, oh, I did already show that. Did I not speak about it? So that's the last slide of our presentation. That was probably the biggest graphics we've ever created, and they were displayed on the most low-res screen you can ever think of. These are gigantic towers in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh and the media city, and they were in celebration of the Saudi National Day. And what we wanted to create is something that veers a little bit from flags and palm trees, but something more that celebrates the culture. So we created different themes and scenes from Saudi everyday life. And they were kind of celebrating 90 years of the kingdom's anniversary. And they were divided into these chapters that can be seen and from all around. And they kind of are divided into how the towers and their faces and how they face each other and how they all play around. And also we managed to squeeze in some typography with a lot of like testing of what these lights might look like, because each one of these lights is probably as big as a desk. But at the end of the day, you have to look at them from far and make sure that the overall effects matches the vision that we had. So this brings us to the end of the talk. That is 15 minutes. Thank you so much.